And welcome to a special edition of Stakelbeck on Terror. Well, when we talk about Iraq today, we think of Sunni and Shia Muslims, Kurds, and Iraq's Christian minority that right now is being wiped out by Islamic jihadists. But not too long ago, Iraq also had a large and thriving Jewish population. In fact, Jews had a presence in Iraq for millennia, dating all the way back to the 6th century BC. Despite periods of violent persecution, they were able to make great contributions in every facet of Iraqi life for centuries, until 1941. That was when Iraqi Muslims, spurred on by the Nazis, conducted a massacre against Baghdad's Jewish community. It was the beginning of the end for Iraq's Jews, most of whom soon immigrated to Israel. The massacre had a name, the Farhud, which literally means violent dispossession. The Farhud is also the title of a powerful new book by best-selling author and investigative journalist Edwin Black. I sat down with him recently to discuss the Farhud and the larger Arab-Muslim role in the Nazi Holocaust. It's a story that's been buried for far too long, and it needs to be told. So let's go to work. Well, Edwin Black, welcome to Stakelbeck on Terror.
And thank you for having me.
This is really an untold story that we have in the Farhud, and a lot of viewers might not know about it. The Nazi alliance with Muslim Arabs during World War II, and the Muslims in the Middle East, many of them actually helped to perpetrate the Holocaust. Give us some insight into the relationship, the alliance between the Nazis and Muslims in the Middle East during World War II, and their joint kind of carrying out of the Holocaust.
The word Farhud means violent dispossession, and it refers to an attempt to exterminate all the Jews of Iraq in a Nazi pogrom, Nazi Arab pogrom, on June 1st and 2nd of 1941. That did not succeed, but they murdered hundreds of Iraqi Jews who had lived in Iraq for 2,600 years. That's a millennium before Muhammad got there, but before Muhammad's Islam got there. Why did this happen? What was it part of? And what I found out is the basis for the subtitle of the book, The Farhud, the Roots of the Arab-Nazi Alliance in the Holocaust. Here was a question. Why did Nazis, who hated all Semites, they were anti-Semitic. That meant the Jews and the Arabs. What is a Semite? Of course, they are the descendants of Shem. Noah had 3 surviving sons. One of them was Shem. Shem begat Abraham, and Abraham begat all of these people. So these are the Semites, or the Shemites, also known as the Semites. So why did the Nazis make common cause with the Arabs?
Who were inferior racially, in the Nazis' view.
In the Nazi eugenic view, they were inferior. Why did the Arabs make common cause with the Germans and the Nazis? Who started this idea? Well, what was the reason? The Arab reason was to destroy the Jewish presence in the Holy Land, meaning Jerusalem, meaning Palestine, and the ability of the Jews to pray at the Western Wall. The Nazi desire was to get the Arab oil, which they needed to conquer the world.
You mentioned a key thing there. There was a Jewish population always in the land of Israel. Then it was known as Palestine after the Romans changed the name. But there was even if it was a small population, there was a Jewish population in the land of Israel well before the 20th century. That's something we don't hear much about.
Of course, there was always a Jewish presence in Jerusalem, in Tiberias, going back centuries. In the 20th century, the Jews began after Herzl in 1898. They began the concept of Zionism, which was a return to the Holy Land, a return to God's land. And this was the part that upset the Arabs. As you know, Palestine was for half a millennium, approximately, a backwater of the Ottoman Empire. And we're talking about the sultans, we're talking about the caliphate, we're talking about the capital of Islam. And as a result, Jews were dhimmis. And dhimmis,
Jews... A key point.
Jews and Christians were dhimmis going back to approximately 700.
And what is that? What is a dhimmi for our viewers who might not know what a dhimmi is, but they need to know what it is?
It really, your question strikes at the heart of the book, the heart of the history, and the heart of the dilemma now facing the world. Although this is a book of history, this history is repeating itself like an awful broken record. This begins in 627 with the extermination of the Jews of Medina. Most of your viewers don't know that Medina, Mecca, Medina was substantially a Jewish town.
This is in modern-day Saudi Arabia where Jews are banned.
Now it is, but back then it was primarily a Jewish town, and Muhammad came to Medina and wanted the Jews to convert to Islam. And they refused. And as a result of that, he, in a mass extermination, had them all beheaded in a public ceremony, and then went on to conquer the rest of the Arabian Peninsula.
And Muhammad personally watched this mass extermination of the Jews. He was there and watched this massacre personally.
Well, of course.
As you describe in the book.
Yes, of course. Muhammad was there, and it was at Muhammad's order. And Muhammad ordered this extermination. And then at that time, there was a great deal of Jewish and Hebraic influence on Islam, because
they faced Jerusalem.
Right. When they prayed 5 times a day, they faced Jerusalem. They changed that after that to face Mecca. In addition, you should know the Quran was not written in Arabic because there was no Arabic at the time. And that's why there are so many Hebrew words in the Arabic language. It was really a combination of a kind of a Syriac and an Arabic and a Hebraic dialect that they spoke in that realm. So after the Islamic conquest of the Arabian Peninsula and of the Middle East, they established the people of the book, that's the Christians, and the Jews as the corruptors of Abraham's message. And Jews and Christians were established by the Pact of Umar in approximately 700 as human inferiors. They did not have dhimmis. They did not have religious freedom. They did not have equal citizenship. They had to pay this special poll tax called the jizya. They could not pray except modestly. They could not build new churches.
Second-class citizens.
Second and third-class citizens. And ironically, it dovetailed with the Nazi ideology that the Jews were Untermenschen, or subhuman. The Muslims also believed, according to the Quranic inscriptions, that the Jews were unclean. Now, why do I bring this up? Is it because something happened 1,400 years ago? No, because the Arabs and the Muslims themselves constantly brought this up in the 20th century as a reason to not coexist with the Jews in Jerusalem and to exterminate the Jews in Europe. There is an iconic moment in every Abrahamic religion. For the Jews, it could be the parting of the seas or the reception of the 10 Commandments. For the Christians, it could be the Sermon on the Mount. It could be the resurrection. And among the iconic moments that has been preserved in the tradition of the Muslim religion is the Medina extermination, where Muhammad triumphed over the Jews and, of course, eventually over the Christians.
Coming up, we take a closer look at the notorious Palestinian Grand Mufti, a staunch ally of Adolf Hitler and an accessory to the Holocaust. Stay tuned.
Ready in the set? Going to Dr. Robertson in 3, 2...
On December 3rd, 2009, Pat Robertson entered the studio to update his landmark work, The Secret Kingdom, to help people live abundant lives amid today's challenges.
I want to talk to you today about The Secret Kingdom. What is The Secret Kingdom?
The Secret Kingdom Volume 1, available now. You're watching CBN News Channel. Available on the web 24/7 at cbnnewschannel.com.
The pogroms, the massacres of Jews in 1929 at the Western Wall and also in Hebron, which is really the biblical heartland.
In 1929, the Jews decided to sit down when they prayed at the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, which is, of course, the remnant of Solomon's Temple. It's the single holiest place in the Jewish religion. It was against Sharia for Jews to sit down.
Sharia Islamic law.
Sharia Islamic law, and the book quotes the actual edicts, the actual commissions, the actual reports. And so when the Jews attempted to sit down, the British police pulled the chairs out from under them so they wouldn't actually sit. But they did sit down, and that brought out a massive massacre that began at the Wailing Wall under the direction of the Mufti of Jerusalem, Husseini, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. It started at the Wailing Wall, and it went all the way up to Hebron. This was a heinous massacre, and scores of Jews were brutally and heinously murdered. Now, what do I mean by that? The Jewish scholar had his brain extricated, and they played ball with it. The baker was baked in his own oven. Another Jew was crucified against a door. Babies were cut in half. It was a horrible, horrible, violent pogrom.
And these were Palestinian Muslim Arabs who carried this out.
Of course they were, and the police in many cases joined them, the Arab police. So that was the turning point. And the Mufti at that point became a cause célèbre. And so they were primed to work with someone in Europe to help get the Jews out of Palestine. On January 30th of 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power, and the Muslims in Palestine and in Lebanon, in Syria, even in India, all approached the Hitler regime through their consulates and said, we want to be Nazis, not fascists, Nazis. Even today, the Syrian Socialist National Socialist Party has a swastika on their flag. So they began to emulate the Nazi Party. Well, the Germans said, we don't want to have anything to do with you because A, we don't want to upset Britain. B, we want to push the Jews out of Germany into Palestine so we can get them out of here. And 3, you are Semites. And eugenically, we are never going to let you be true Arab Nazis. That changed in about 1936, 1937. And suddenly, because of the era of the Nazi desire to conquer Europe with the oil that was necessary and to go against Russia, eventually, they formed a greater and greater alliance. It's important to understand that the Arabs wanted all the Jews in Europe exterminated. Why? Because as the Nazis came in and took over Poland and Austria and Czechoslovakia and Hungary, the Jews were being pushed into Palestine. There was no refuge. All the doors of immigration were closed. And so the more the Nazis expanded into Europe, the more they came into Palestine.
Tell us more about the Mufti of Jerusalem, the guy who was just a working partner of Hitler in the extermination of the Jews, was an honored guest in Berlin, as you describe in the book, and eventually helped spearhead the Farhud, which we're going to wrap up with the Farhud. You talk about massacres. Tell us more about the Mufti and how he's still kind of an honored, revered figure among Muslims today. I believe that the terror godfather, Yasser Arafat, said that he was from the line of the Mufti.
Of course, the Mufti of Jerusalem was vastly more than an honored guest in Germany. The Mufti of Jerusalem was on the Nazi payroll. The Mufti of Jerusalem was brought in to Bosnia and Albania to organize the most vicious and heinous Waffen-SS units known as the Ustashi, which was a magnitude more violent and heinous than anything at Auschwitz. In one night, for example, the Ustashi, which was a Catholic and Muslim binational killing army, massacre army, an army of genocide. They had a throat-cutting contest, and one guard at Jasenovac concentration camp cut 1,350 throats in one night, and ahead of 3 other guys who each cut 600 just as sport. This was the most vicious, violent vortex of the Holocaust, and was organized by the Mufti of Jerusalem in association with Nazi Germany.
So the leader of the Palestinians, the Arab Muslim leader of the Palestinians, spearheaded some of the most vicious massacres of the Holocaust.
Absolutely, and I don't want you to think that it was just a radio broadcast. The Mufti of Jerusalem was constantly on the radio broadcast around the world, while the Germans were using euphemisms for extermination like Sonderbehandlung, which means special treatment. The Mufti of Jerusalem wasn't hiding anything. Kill the Jews wherever you see them. Exterminate them. The billboards and the flyers in the marketplace in the Arab capitals, they all said when on earth, in heaven, Allah is your master. On earth, it is Adolf Hitler. The name Adolf rivaled Muhammad as the most common newborn name. They invented a Arab personality for Hitler. They said his real name was Muhammad Hadari. He was a little Egyptian boy from a small village who went to all the mosques, and he was there to liberate the Jews, to liberate the Arabs, and kill the Jews.
So he was a hero in the Muslim world, Adolf Hitler.
Yes, and the Mufti spoke directly to Hitler, face to face, and was in newsreels.
Cover of your book.
Right.
The Mufti of Jerusalem.
That is the
Adolf
iconic
Hitler.
That is the iconic shot
photo.
on top, and on the bottom is one of the iconic efforts of the Mufti to rally the troops in Yugoslavia.
Up next, Arab-Muslim hatred of the Jews culminates in numerous massacres and an alliance with the Nazis. Don't move.
The 700 Club. See it as never before. The stories, the places, the people. The 700 Club, now in HD. We'll take you to India, China, Africa, Thailand, and across the USA. So close, you'll feel as though you were there. Look into the eyes of the people you've helped and see the hope you've given them. Experience what God is doing in the world today in high definition. The 700 Club, now in HD.
Hi, I'm Terry Musin. I'd like to tell you about Orphan's Promise. Orphan's Promise helps children who've had tragic beginnings in life.
My father died, my mother started drinking, and gave me away to the orphanage. We were homeless, and she made me beg for food.
We don't know where our sister is. I'm looking for her now.
We want to return to be with our mother, but she doesn't want us.
In many countries, children are turned out of orphanages when they turn 16. They lose the only security they've ever known. Many will become easy prey for prostitution rings and criminal gangs. Together, you and I can break this cycle for these kids. For just $20 a month, you'll provide computer training, life skills, and people that care, preparing them for a future of hope. Show them God's love. Call the number on your screen right now and say you'll help.
You're watching CBN News Channel. Available on the web 24/7 at cbnnewschannel.com.
We're getting to kind of the culmination of that Arab-Muslim alliance in World War II with the Farhud. I want to ask you about the Jewish populations in North Africa, in the Middle East, during that time period. 1 million Jews lived in countries like Iraq, Egypt, Morocco. Talk about the Jewish population during that time in the Middle East and North Africa, and specifically tell us about the great legacy, the great Jewish legacy in Iraq, in Baghdad, for 2,600 years.
2,600 years, the Jews were in Mesopotamia since the ancient Israelites were kidnapped and brought up to Babylon, 1,400 years,
Nebuchadnezzar,
2,600 years before. So every Bible student is familiar with it. But there were Jews all over North Africa, Jews all over the Arabian Peninsula originally, and of course all over the Middle East, especially after they were expelled by the Romans. And they represented a middle class. They represented an intelligent class, but they were always subject to dhimmitude. Now, dhimmitude was an extremely obnoxious form of persecution, and in some cases Jews thrived, and in some cases Jews were horribly massacred. There was no way to generalize about exactly what the dhimmitude was in any given decade, in any given territory, from North Africa to Iran. But what I can say is that in Iraq, while Jews rose to a certain self-confidence, they were always considered to be subhuman filth. Now, what do I mean by that? When a Jew stood in front of a store to pay his bill, when he left, the shopkeeper would take a broom and sweep the dirt away, which had been fouled. When, if a Jew were to, in fact, even now, even just days before you and I have this conversation, some Christian women were drinking from a river in Pakistan, and they were condemned for fouling the river. And as a result of that, it was considered blasphemy, and this person was sentenced to death.
Coming up, we examine the Farhud and its legacy today. Stay tuned.
From the world's leading Christian news operation, a groundbreaking step that brings you national, international news and analysis at your fingertips. The CBN News Channel. For the first time ever, you get the benefits of a full-time news channel from the renowned CBN News team, 24/7 on the web. CBN News Channel provides a new platform by delivering CBN News to a larger audience through the latest technology.
News viewers have made it clear they're dissatisfied with their choices. They want news without a spin.
CBN News Channel answers that need.
With a trustworthy alternative that's easy to find, easy to watch, any time of the day.
CBNNewsChannel.com. 24/7 on the web.
Daddy?
Yeah, buddy.
How many nickels are in a dollar?
There are 20 nickels in a dollar.
How do birds fly? Does milk really make my bones stronger?
Yeah.
Daddy, when we die, will we go to heaven?
Do you have the answer to life's biggest question? Call the 700 Club. We'll help you find answers to the important questions life brings your way.
And this is all Quranic. I mean, this is in the Quran, in the Hadiths. The Quran refers to Jews as the sons of apes and pigs.
The concept of Jews being subhuman and being an enemy is deeply enshrined in many, many passages of the Quran.
And the Hadiths.
And it's lived. It is embraced. In other words, it's not some ancient phrase from 1,400 years ago. This is a lifestyle that has not had reform. For the same reason that Jews were not permitted to sit down without permission while praying, the Arabs would not allow the Jews to have their own state. It's dhimmitude, it's Sharia, it's the Quranic experience. It's important to understand. I'm only talking history now. I'm talking not about the 21st century, but about the 20th century. Although I can tell you what happened in the 20th century has created the table that has been made for us that we are now sitting at in the 21st century.
Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad.
So as a result of this 1941 pact, the Jews, there was an attempt to exterminate the Jews, and many Muslims stood by the Jews, but not enough of them, in Baghdad, saved them from total extermination, but there was a 2-day riot. The British did not intervene because they needed the oil.
And this was the Farhud.
This was the Farhud in question. Babies were cut in half, thrown in the river. Girls were raped in front of their parents. Parents were murdered in front of their daughters and sons. Homes were invaded. The Jews ran up to the rooftop and they jumped from roof to roof. They threw their babies down to waiting rescuers with blankets on the ground. It was a 2-day massacre of unlimited violence. And finally, the British and the Iraqi authorities, which had been installed by the British, finally intervened after 2 years. But it was from 2 days. But it was at that point, after the Farhud, that the Arabs said to Hitler, no more riots. Now we're on the battlefield with you, shoulder to shoulder. And the Arab-Nazi alliance in the Holocaust was complete. The Arabs were running many concentration camps in North Africa, horrible ones, which are described in the book. The Arabs were constantly urging the European ministers not to save Jewish children during the Holocaust by sending them to Palestine. The Mufti of Jerusalem would say, no, send them to Auschwitz. In fact, we have the evidence that the Mufti of Jerusalem was actually in the concentration camps, including a subcamp of Auschwitz, and was in the main concentration camp that organized them all at Sachsenhausen.
The Mufti, the Farhud, this 2-day massacre, unprovoked massacre of Jews in Baghdad. The Mufti, the Farhud, and Adolf Hitler live on today in the Muslim psyche. These are still looked at as heroic figures and heroic actions.
Not only do they live on today, if you go to the internet, you will find that there are still many Egyptians whose first name is Hitler. And we describe them in the book. Even as bold a peacemaker as Anwar Sadat was
the former Egyptian president.
A former Egyptian president, was a great admirer of Hitler. And what is not known to most of your viewers is that on his fateful voyage to Jerusalem, where he finally made peace, he was wearing swastikas all over his tie. And so this lives on, and this is what we're faced with now.
Thanks again to Edwin Black for that powerful interview. Again, the book is called The Farhud. If you want to understand what's going on today in the Middle East, you need to pick up this book. And keep it right here as we report on the advancing global jihad that's in your backyard. Until next time, take care and God bless.